Welcome, Traceable Designers. Today we're going to make an art style curtain valance. This valance does include full lining, and we are going to create a custom size. You can create this valance to hang with a straight curtain rod or as a wraparound style. You'll find a link to this Traceable Designer custom valance kit in the description below. To begin, you'll need to size your fabric section. We are using a folded fabric section. You want to make sure you have a very straight edge across the top of the fabric. We're using the half measurement, so since mine is 54 inches wide plus the seam, I'm going to be marking at 27.5 inches. Plus, you need to make sure you have plenty of depth. We will have a rod pocket section on top that is not lined. So I'm marking the 4-inch arrow for my rod pocket. So you'll flip the design form over to make sure it's marked on both sides. And then measure from the top of the valance fabric down 4 inches to make sure you can properly position your design form straight across the fabric. We are going to trace this design form upside down, so position it along your 4-inch mark and along your width marks. Trace down the right side and then underneath the valance, and then up the slanted section, and then we'll continue across. Now we're going to slide the design form over to the folded fabric edge as we trace in order to add width to this panel. So our arched sides are on the outside. That's the reason for reversing the design form. Make sure you stay along the marks that are on top, the 4-inch marks for your lining positioning. Then just slide the form over to the right to finish tracing the rod pocket section. To cut out your valance, I'm cutting off the outside edge first, and then just follow your traced line along the bottom, and you want to make sure you have very distinct curves where the design form shape changes so that you'll be able to create a nice arched style valance. To size your lining, use the cutout shape. Since this is a custom shape, a custom width, I need to make sure that my lining fits. So you'll move the lining down to the rod pocket marks and make sure you have excess around all edges before you begin. Then open your fabric with the right side facing out and make sure you clearly mark the 4-inch mark where you're going to begin with your seam tape to start your lining. Make sure you can't see the mark, that you're going to stay inside that 5/8 inch space there on the edge. Turn the steam off of your iron, use a medium-high heat, and then position your seam tape along the edge without overlapping onto the ironing board, starting at your 4-inch marker for your rod pocket. Then just follow along the seam tape, making sure that it stays inside of the edges, and you want to really create a nice shape. So I've done my first side, and then along the bottom I need this to look squared off. So I'm ironing my seam tape and then stopping at the first turn in the fabric. Position the seam tape overlapped onto the other section and continue along the edge, and then when you get to that center area outside of the arch, make sure you're on the right side, not the back. You're just going to go straight across there. So I'm continuing up to where the straight section starts. Then I'm putting a piece of seam tape across and then just following all the way across the bottom line up the side, and then when you get to the other side, it's very important that you do not fuse the tape over the rod pocket section. So pay attention to that and cut that off before you hit the 4-inch marker. Then wait for the seam tape to completely cool and pull off the seam tape. Make sure not to remove any of the glue. In this case, a little bit came off, so I'm going to put a little bit more on there because you don't want a hole when you add your lining. So carefully add a little section if you do pull the glue, and then just remove the paper. So now it's time to add your lining. So we need to put our lining 4 inches down from the straight top edge. So I'm marking across the fabric, making sure that I mark a little higher than the 4 inches so that you don't actually see it on the front of the valance. And then align your very straight edge of your top lining along your 4-inch marks. Make sure everything is covered and that you're extending past all the glue on all of the sides. Position your lining along your marks. If you need to add extra marks so you can see a nice straight edge across the top there, go ahead and mark those. Make sure that your lining does extend past all of the edges. It's very important because as you're using this sweeping motion from the center out, sometimes the lining can move a little bit. So make sure you cut a piece that's plenty large enough to go beyond the edges. So I'm using a sweeping motion center out, making sure that my lining stays aligned across my marks. And you want to use this center out sweeping motion to avoid any buckling. You don't want your lining to buckle in the back so that your valance won't hang straight and even. So fuse across the entire panel and then run your iron along the edges. You can see here I barely cut this large enough. I almost was too short, so you want to make sure that it is wide enough to cover all of the glue. Then follow the shape of the valance and cut off all of the excess lining. So before we turn our valance, we're going to snip at all of the corners. You just cut little V marks, but don't cut all the way through the seam tape or you'll end up with a hole in your valance. So where you see a turn or a curve, make a couple of little snips before you reverse your fabric. Make sure it's completely cool. If it's not completely cool, you will break through the seams. And then just mold the fabric, carefully pushing out the lining until the shape starts to come into view. Use your hand to get along the corners, and you're really trying to get the lining to hide behind the valance. So you'll pull that up and pull it even and then run your iron along, and then the shape starts to happen. This is a cotton fabric, so it does move a little bit and it makes a nice shape along the edges. So take your time until you get all of the edges flattened along the bottom and along the sides. Then we're going to secure the seams. So you'll cut a little piece of fusible backing, make sure it hides completely behind. If you don't, then you will risk fusing your pocket closed. So fuse your backing, make sure you get it on both sides, and then we're going to fuse the lining. So we're going to use long strips of fusible backing to hide behind the lining. This is going to hold that lining up so it doesn't sag from behind. So cut a few strips and then just follow along the back. Now, I like to run the iron over top, make sure your lining is completely hidden, and then you'll lift the lining and then fuse that down. Make sure it's a little bit below the edges because you cannot have that extending beyond the lining. So once that paper is completely cooled, you'll just remove it and then fuse your seams. Now before you fuse your lining across the back, make sure you sweep everything up, make sure it's fully covered. And then again, center out sweeping motion. This is very important that you take your time with this so you have nice flat lining across the back, and then fuse all the way around the sides and then just across the top. Your center out motion will ensure that you don't have buckling on the outside edges of your valance. So now we're going to fix the seam on the top. We're going to actually make a clean seam. So you just iron a strip of fusible backing across the top edge. Again, don't overlap onto the ironing board, and then just fold that over and fuse that down. So to make our rod pocket, we're going to fold that section over. It's 3.5 inches and mark the back of the lining. When we add the fusible seam tape, it needs to stay inside of where the pocket will fold. So you'll just follow along your marks, go the entire length of or width of your valance, and then measure up 1 inch for your second strip of seam tape. You want to leave a full inch space in between so your seam tape follows along those marks, because your rod is going to fit in the center. This is a rod pocket that includes an upper header. So fuse your seam tape all the way along your marks and then remove both strips of paper to expose the glue. Then when you fold your fabric over for your rod pocket, make sure it covers all of the exposed glue, and then iron your rod pocket flat. Make sure it's fully fused and completely cool before you insert the rod into the rod pocket area. So now you can see we have a rod pocket right in the center and we have a header on top. So you can slip your rod right into that rod pocket and hang your valance. You can use a straight decorative curtain rod, or you can also size your pocket for a 1-inch metal curved rod, which will wrap around the returns. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll be notified the next time I post another No-Sew DIY Valance video.